Japan stands apart from the rest of the modern world in many distinct ways. Its culture, economy, and infrastructure are second to none, but one particular statistic seems more relevant, considering the global homeless crisis we're currently facing. It's no secret that the global economy has not quite been the same since the worldwide pandemic. While America, England, and other major countries are seeing sky-high homelessness rates, Japan boasts of an almost 0% homelessness rate, despite having a population of over 125 million people. So, how did Japan pull it off? The answer to that question is complicated and strangely depressing. When you look past the sensational headlines and the government policies put in place, you see a darker side of Japanese culture and why their approach to solving the problem might not be the best one. According to the Japanese government, only 3,448 people out of the 125 million people in Japan are homeless as of 2022. That is roughly 0.003 of its population. Round down the figures and you get 0%. Compared to the 600,000 homeless in America or the 271,000 homeless in England, Japan is well ahead of the curve, and its strategies to achieving this utopia-like state are varied and culturally motivated. Japanese culture stigmatizes homelessness. Over the years, dozens of stories have come out from Japan about homeless men being assaulted by children and teenagers, who walk away with nothing but a slap on the wrist. In one particular article covered by the New York Times, a homeless man, Mr. Sugai, was assaulted by 3 boys. Their response after being questioned was that they were killing time, getting rid of stress, and disposing of society's trash. Mr. Sugai suffered a black eye and multiple bruises, and said homeless people were most afraid of boys. According to Mr. Sugai, they were the most dangerous. The public sentiment is that those who do not contribute to society meaningfully are less than trash and deserve no compassion or pity. Men who are homeless especially get no sympathy. Just like everywhere else, men are expected to be self-reliant. Any man who ends up homeless is seen as an embarrassment to himself and his family. Begging is strictly outlawed in Japan, leaving the homeless no option but to earn money another way. If you're caught begging, you'll be jailed for several days or fined, depending on the situation. For most, it's a high-risk, low-reward endeavor, so they don't bother. Begging being illegal is not a new thing either. It's been that way since the Edo period. The Tokugawa shogunate at the time wanted to reduce the crime and begging rate, so he abolished it and forced floaters to work at coolies in mines. Hundreds of years later, the tradition persists. In contrast, hostile architecture is more of a recent development. The government has an informal policy of making public areas uncomfortable for the homeless to hang around for long periods, especially in urban areas. Parks are locked down after hours. Benches are designed to be difficult to sit on for long periods, and other problem areas are renovated to include awkward art pieces, slanting chairs, and other unwieldy designs that chase away lingering people. Another factor that helps keep Japan's homeless population low is the lax construction policies. In contrast to other developed countries, getting approval for a construction project and building on government land is relatively easy. The movement started as a reaction to the Japanese economy post-World War II, when there was a huge demand for homes. Because of the questionable construction methods that were devised back then, Japanese buildings are built more for aesthetics and less for functionality and longevity. The average Japanese building lasts about 30 years before it gets demolished and rebuilt. New homes hold more value than older ones, and there is an unbelievable number of apartments in urban centers like Tokyo. All this means there's always cheap housing if you know where to look. As long as you have a halfway decent job, you should not go homeless. A large population of people who have fallen through the cracks of society and ended up homeless worldwide are addicts. Japanese laws make it very difficult to let them remain addicts. They have a minimum 5-year sentence for drug use and abuse. The threat of spending 5 years at the very least for drug abuse keeps a great deal of people on the straight and narrow. People can become homeless for a variety of reasons. The government has ensured that drug use is not one of them. According to SAMHSA, 30% of people who end up homeless are individuals with mental illness. Japan's great healthcare system ensures that people with mental illness are well looked after and placed in hospitals where they can get the help they need. If you're finding any of this information useful or fascinating, like this video and subscribe. Despite the official numbers advertised on the government sites and the fanfare that followed its discovery in 2022, the reality of Japan's homeless situation is a bigger problem than they're ready to admit. In the late 90s, the Japanese real estate market and financial bubble popped, leaving millions devastated without jobs, homes, and hope to recover. Several decades later, some members of this generation have yet to claw their way back into a comfortable life. They've settled for low-paying temporary jobs that paid for their feeding and not much else. They cannot afford rent, even in the most affordable sections of Japan. This generation became known as the Lost Generation, and is resorted to staying at just about anywhere to resist ending up on the streets. Japanese manga cafes were born partly from this desperation. They provide people teetering on the brink of absolute ruin somewhere they can lay their heads. They're cheaper than hotels and offer bare-bone amenities. The first manga cafe was founded in 1979 in Nagoya City. It differs from the standard coffee establishments by offering readers a private reading room and the option to stay all night long. Manga cafes eventually expanded their services to include 24-hour stays, fresh underwear, food, and accommodation, in addition to internet browsing. They unofficially became homeless shelters where the least fortunate stay until they get back on their feet. Like the rest of society, people staying at manga cafe also work. The cafes offer them low-paying hourly jobs that pay enough for them to browse for a few hours. Some even enjoy the benefit of a full-time job that pays them relatively well for the various skills and talents they've been able to develop. It's nearly impossible to tell if someone lives in an internet cafe by their clothing and how they carry themselves. They're dressed well to avoid the ridicule, disdain, and apathy the local population feels towards homeless people. While it's socially unacceptable to live in a manga cafe, the alternative is much more worse. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, internet cafes throughout Japan closed down, leaving people teetering on the edge of no place to live in comfort. Rather than let them fall through the cracks, the government in Tokyo, home to the second largest homeless population in the country, offered them accommodations in vacant hotels and sports halls. Since Japan had a relatively low level of outbreak, bunching together homeless people who were mostly over 50 years old was risky, but certainly better than leaving them on the street. When the time came to count the homeless population in 2022, the numbers were artificially lowered due to the change in accommodation. The number shot downwards from 3,992 to 3,824, both of which might be incorrect. There are far more homeless people in Japan than the government is willing to admit. Excluding the people who unofficially live at manga cafes, there might be as much as 3 times the number of recorded homelessness. Homeless people in Japan have historically lived in hard-to-find places to avoid the ire of people who live in the cities and the government. When they're out of sight, they're metaphorically out of mind, and the government expends no great effort to find their hiding spot and perform an accurate censor for all of the missing people with and without families. Homeless people in Japan typically camp out under bridges, near rivers, and other places that can make their lives easier, but are also remote. The government has systems and policies in place to help people experiencing homelessness, despite what we might have indicated in this video so far. While the government is very averse to offering monetary help directly, they do care for their middle-aged homeless in other effective ways. The Homeless Self-Supporting Act was created in 2002 to get homeless people off the streets and back in their homes. It recently received an extension in 2017, offering individuals the opportunity to hone their skills and learn new ones to acquire jobs and leave the streets. To encourage businesses to take in homeless people, the government also offers subsidies to those who hire homeless workers. They also subsidize rent for the homeless, as well as provide food in rare instances. Non-governmental organizations and charities also play a big part in supporting the homeless population of Japan and keeping it low. They offer the less fortunate food, clothing, and sometimes shelter. More than anybody else, they have a true pulse on what's happening among the people and how much help the homeless of Japan truly need. This is about 25% of the Japanese workforce, and it's a sign that there will be more homeless people sooner rather than later. Temp workers are paid very little and have nearly no prospect of a better job, forcing them to spend their lives in manga cafes and subhuman rentals. Because of societal pressure, these groups of people are banished to the fringes of civilized society and forced to endure in silence and fear for the day that a sudden economic change might render them homeless. Japan is no modern poverty-free utopia. It has its share of societal dysfunctions and problematic cultural behavior, but some of its policies do have merit. Cheaper housing for the homeless is always a good motivator for them to get back to work and reclaim their lives, and harsher drug policies force people to think twice about partaking in drugs. As dystopian and cold as Japan can sometimes seem, it's important to remember that it's better than most countries in our modern world. What do you think of Japan's approach to managing the homeless? What do you think needs to change? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe.